Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Truth That Heals podcast. Today, I'm with special guest Suki Jones. Suki, thank you for being here with us today.
Thank you for having me on.
Now, before we get started, can you briefly introduce yourself to the audience?
Sure thing. I am Suki Jones. I am a person in long-term recovery. I am also someone that has a fairly high ACEs score. I have a lot of, what that means is I have a lot of childhood trauma and traumas that have led me to where I am today. I'm a recovering alcoholic and addict, and I'm also a survivor of childhood sexual abuse. Also a writer. I should probably notate that. And I'm a writer.
Yeah, I just finished your book, your memoir. Can you tell us a bit about your memoir?
The memoir is really like the full story of like how my life has evolved, just to this point. I really struggled with like how far back to go or what people would find interesting or if people would relate. And the longer I've been in recovery in particular, and the more work I've done on myself, the topic of like childhood abuse in different areas has come up, and I was like, this is something that like so many people can relate to, and it would be doing a disservice to write the book and not include like violence in my home, alcoholism in my home with my parent. There was a kidnapping attempt when I was young. My mother had her life was threatened, and then there was childhood sexual abuse, which has been something that I didn't realize like at the time, of course, or even into my young adult years, like how prevalent that was and how many people, especially in recovery, but I think just in general, how many people have experienced something like that. And in retrospect, I'm so glad that I did write about that because it's a big part of the book. I always tell people, like, people will be like, oh, I got your book. And I'm always like, oh, I hope you enjoy it. It's like I want people to enjoy it, but it's also like very, very heavy. Like it's a heavy book to read. It is kind of a lot to read. I've had more than one person tell me like that they had to read it in chunks, even though it's kind of a quick read, because the topic and the subject matter is something I didn't want to, it was something I really didn't want to shy away from. I was like, if I'm going to write it, I have to write it with full vulnerability. Like, this is what happened to me. Like, I couldn't write it just like without acknowledging the traumas that I experienced. Also, I really get into having children, raising them as a single mom, and battling opiate addiction, and then getting into recovery. So the end is, I'm recovered or not recovered, but I am in recovery. So
the name of the book is See, Swallow Me. And something that I find interesting is that many people, not only the United States, but around the world, are suffering through addictions or through traumas and are trying to recover. However, not everybody writes about it. Where did you find the motivation or the courage or whatever it was to sit down and write your story?
that was the hardest part for sure. Like, I think like it's one thing even to talk about it like at group level, if you're like a 12-step person, or even if you're working with a therapist, it's hard to talk about those subjects. I have a really close relationship with my adult children, and they were the driving force behind me writing it. Like my son is very creative, my daughter's very creative, and they were both like, my daughter in fact like got their degree in creative writing recently from Mills College, and so they were both really integral in saying you need to write your story, like it's important. And so I would write it sort of in chunks, and it would get overwhelming. I'd be like, ooh, like I'd feel taxed. Like that was a lot, And so it was kind of in chunks, and it wasn't well assembled. So it was really during the pandemic when my son was like this is your opportunity to like to finish. You need to finish the book. And I was like, okay. So, and like literally would call me, both my son and daughter would call me and be like, are you working on your book? Are you writing? And so I felt like some pressure from my kids, and like even my mom, who like has never really been a great fan of my writing. She like, because I used to write poetry when I was a kid, and like I've always written, but like my poetry was like very cryptic and like very like aloof. And I think that there's a progression there. Like when I was younger, it was kind of cryptic and aloof because I wasn't ready to be vulnerable. So I wrote these things that were sort of like, what are you trying to say? That progressed like in my writing, and it progressed while I was writing the book. So it was cathartic for sure, but it was um, it was really a family sort of driven thing. Like I had the support of my family behind me.
And I think that's awesome that you have your kids. I wouldn't say pressuring, maybe that's the word.
A
I
little
mean, a
pressure.
little pressure, but they're very motivating to get you to write your
Yeah,
story.
yeah.
And I was listening to you on another podcast. I can't remember which one, so I can't give credit to that podcaster. But you were saying that in your writing journey, you were writing the book on your iPhone.
Yes,
Can
I
you
wrote.
talk about that?
Oh my gosh, I wrote. I'm not super tech savvy like at all. So but I can do all kinds of things on my iPhone and on my iPad to a lesser degree. But like I'm very comfortable on my iPhone. I know how it works. I know what it does. I know what results I'll get out of it. So it all started in my notes app, and it was just like in my notes before my daughter was like, you need to start an actual document for this. And like, I mean, they like walked me through it. And my daughter, in fact, did some editing on the book too. So it's like, but yeah, like the whole thing, my agent, like nobody, everybody's like, that's crazy. Like nobody writes an entire book on their phone. And I'm like, well, I did. I'm
And,
sure
and
there's probably easier ways to do it for sure, but
yes, but I think it's a great example that if someone wants to write a book or start something, just take that first step, even if you're not tech
yes.
savvy. And that's for me, I think, very inspirational and motivating. So now I want to write my own book. But oh, anyways, I really like your example that you did that. That's cool. I think that's pretty
Thank
cool.
you. Yeah. I mean, like really, like we have the technology at our fingertips. Like everybody's got a notes app or something like that. So just like 5 minutes a day, like just put something in there.
So now I wanted to go to the book. Throughout the book, of course, there is drug use. And people say, and not all, but there are some who will say that weed is a gateway drug. In your memoir, there is an episode there where I believe you're sharing your first experience with weed, with marijuana. Would you say that for you, in your experience, was weed a gateway drug?
Personally, I don't feel like it was a gateway drug. Like I actually am one of those people that never really liked weed. And like my experiences early on, like I didn't have great experiences with weed. Like I kept trying it, thinking that like I would get the feeling that all my friends seem to have because they seem to enjoy it so much and we're so into like just like stoner culture. And I really wanted to be a part of that. Like, and I was like, why isn't this working for me? Like, I need to like figure out like the science behind like what do I need to smoke more? Do I need to be I couldn't figure it out. And it seemed like no matter what I did, um, just pot wasn't going to work for me. And so I eventually like kind of like took it out of the equation. Not that I didn't like, like somebody was like, oh, do you want to take a hit? And I'd be like, sure. And then, like I'd immediately regret it. I'd immediately be like like, oh my God, like, can you die from this? Like my heart would be racing and I would be just like in full anxiety mode. So I don't think that weed was a gateway drug for me. I think the fact that I had access to alcohol and like, not that I'm blaming my mother, but like my mom had no qualms with me drinking in the house at, you know, even at a very young age. So I think like that was more of a gateway, like where it was like, you know, I had that permission to like take the edge off. And so I think that was more of a gateway kind of thing than weed ever was. Weed was just like one more symptom of that ideology that I needed something to make it better.
Is it okay with you if I read an excerpt from your book? Just
Absolutely. Yeah.
okay, and I want to, yeah, I'll read this excerpt. The first time I did heroin, I felt like I was floating, drifting through a warm dream, but it's never quite like that again. After a while, doing heroin feels like walking underwater and not being able to come up for air. Every day, I feel like I'm drowning. What was going on in your heart at that time when you were writing those words?
That was that was hard to write because there's like equal parts of like drug nostalgia where I'm romanticizing it, but also when I'm thinking about that, it's so linked with being dope sick and like the struggle that is um getting sober or getting cleaner, like getting off heroin. Like the two are so intertwined that it was hard for me to write about it and not have those things come into play in my mind. But I really wanted to convey like how how heroin really did seem like the solution for me at the beginning. Like it really did seem like this kind of a cure all. You know, like it was like it really like really blotted out all the all the trauma, all the noise in the background. Like it really dampened it. But then the more I did it, the further into my addiction I got. It was, you know, it was just like sucking me under. Like it was like a black hole that I couldn't, you know, like I just couldn't get out of fast enough. Like it was like quicksand. You know, like you are just constantly struggling. You know.
Yeah, and you see that throughout the book that you're going through those struggles. But now I wanted to kind of understand what were the tools that you've learned along the way that have helped you, or maybe not tools, but steps or wisdom that have helped you to kind of battle those addictions.
I'm wary of giving like advice about that because like I don't want anyone to think like that that's going to work for them. Like I think that like what worked for me, um like if someone's struggling, like definitely like try that. But like if it doesn't work for you, that doesn't mean that like that you're hopeless. Like everybody has their own path and for me like the tools that I learned along the way, like I kind of had to really tune into what I thought was going to benefit me best and not look at like, oh well that's working for them or they just did that or they went to rehab or like I had to really and it was hard because my mind was so muddled and I was so deep in my addiction that it was hard to think clearly. And when people talk about like a moment of clarity in recovery, like I definitely had that where there was just like this little slender slice of hope and I was like, "Oh, I think maybe I can do something with that." And for me, like that little sliver, that little wedge was a number of things coinciding at the same time. Somebody that I knew not well, like I didn't know this person well at all, kind of offered up 12 step to me on a silver platter and was like, you need to, you should check this out. And I was like, I don't want to check that out. But like they kept kind of pushing it, not pushing, but like reintroducing it or like making it available to me in sort of a like a gentle way. So I didn't feel pressured at all, but I knew it was an option. Um, and then I also went on methadone with my boyfriend at the time, which I was like, I don't know if this is going to work, but I was so miserable that I didn't. I was like open for anything, like if somebody had suggested a cult to me at that time, like I probably would have been like, will it get me off heroin? Like, well, can I stop doing drugs if I do it? Like I was really like spiritually beaten down. Like I was like kind of just like I'll take anything, like whatever it is you're offering up that might help, I'll try it. Like kind of like throwing spaghetti at the wall. I went to the methadone clinic, and the counselor that I had at the methadone clinic, almost right off the bat, like pretty quickly was like, you need to dump your boyfriend, which I was like, what? Like we came in here together, we're gonna get clean and sober together. And she was like, girl, no, you're not. She was like, get rid of him. And I was just like, what? Like I couldn't believe she was telling me that. Like I really thought, because we were kind of like a team doing this together.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of a rude awakening for me, but she really pivoted the idea to me that like I really had to focus on myself and my children. Like you need to do this for you. And like I think there was some part of me that felt like that was selfish. Like I really shouldn't be giving myself that much love or attention um or any of that. So like it was a hard thing to do, to be like, okay, like I need to do this just for me. Like and the fallout of that is that my children get a better mother, that my mom gets a better daughter, that I'm a better friend, that I have a life. Like because my life was like this, chaotic whirlwind. So so it was like it was a combination of things. It was like going to 12 step and like checking it out and hating it, but going anyway. And doing a methadone program, which, like I had a lot of people tell me like, oh, that's a terrible idea. Like, you then you're gonna be on methadone forever. And methadone, there was a lot of bad, like just amongst addicts, like a lot of people really had bad things to say about methadone. And I once I got on the program for a little bit and I was thinking like a little more clearly, I just decided I'm just going to do this program to the letter. I'm going to do exactly what my counselor says. I'm going to do the urine test when she asks. I'm going to show up for my appointment with her. I'm going to do the group therapy. I'm going to go to the 12-step meeting. So I did all the things that were suggested of me, even if I didn't want to. And it worked. Like even though I didn't want it to work really, like I was kind of looking for like a reprieve. Like I didn't intend to give up drugs forever. Like I wanted to get my life stable. Like I didn't know what that would look like after that. I just wanted to like have things like not be crazy anymore, but it worked in spite of me not really believing that it would work or thinking that it really would.
So you said just a moment ago something to the effect that it is. It looks like you even almost felt bad trying to get recovery. Was there like a guilt involved? And if so, what do you think was the source of that guilt to getting better?
I think that's an interesting question. I think that like I probably had like some remorse about leaving behind a lifestyle that was serving me to some extent. Like it was, like if you do something for so long, like, and that's all and you're familiar with it, even if it's chaotic and crazy, how to maneuver through it, how to navigate it, even though it's nuts, but if you take all the crazy, chaotic stuff out of that equation and you're like, oh, now it's just like this open space and I don't know what to do there. Like I don't know how to navigate that. It's unfamiliar and it's scary. Like there's a real vulnerability and fear attached to letting go of a lifestyle, even if it's not serving you anymore. So I think that there was guilt around that. There was also guilt around like ending a relationship that I was in, and kind of like, like I felt like I was like feeding him to the wolves, like you're on your own, but like really like my counselor was 100% right. Like I needed to focus on me. Like if you're focusing on your wellness, then the other things are going to fall into line. Your relationships with people, um, my parenting, my relationship with my mother, like all of those things kind of fall into line when you focus on improving yourself and trying to be the best version of you that you can be.
Looking back, what would you say are things that people often misunderstand about addiction or about addicts?
Like I think the view on addiction has changed a lot. And I think the view on addicts and addiction hasn't changed much at all. So it's interesting, like, because people, like, I lived in San Francisco for a number of years, and um, I work with different harm reduction organizations, and you hear not people within those agencies, but you hear people out in the community talk about how like they just need to get a job, or they just need to get up, like they just need to, like, kind of like the Nancy Reagan approach, like they just need to say no. And it's really not that easy. Like I've had this conversation before with multiple people that where I'll tell them I'm bipolar, right? Because I am. I'm bipolar. And I'll tell someone I have mental health issues. I'm bipolar. And that, they'll be like, really? They look at me like, you don't look like you're bipolar. And I'm like, well, what does that look like to you? And it doesn't matter how many times I tell someone that I have mental health issues, that I'm bipolar, and like have PTSD, I have these traumas. And but when those things present themselves, then they seem surprised. Like, oh, like, why are you acting like that? Well, remember what I told you, I have mental health issues? Like, this is me having mental health issues. And I think to some degree that carries over to addiction. Like, people are really quick to look at like how it looks from the outside. They see people struggling, not continuing to use, even though they are unhoused and can't get to the services that they need. And so they think it's one way. It's not one way. Like, these are individuals who are struggling. Addiction is, it's a debilitating disease. Like, it's something that, like, if everyone could control their addiction, no one would have addiction issues.
Yeah, something that I found very interesting about your book was that from the title to each chapter, there is a bit of music that's involved. Would you say that music has been healing for you? And if so, how?
I would say music has been healing. um, Music, because I was an only child. And so I think, like, a lot of times, because my parents had a very volatile relationship, a lot of times, like when my parents were fighting or there was like chaos happening in the house, I would go into the downstairs family room, and I would turn on music, and it would drown out what was going on upstairs. And I would sit in a rocking chair and I would listen to like stacks of 45s of, like, like the same stacks, like I'd put them on repeat, or like I'd throw on an album and play it through over and over. And it was music and reading were like my early escape mechanisms. Like, they were a way of me finding serenity and solace in like a chaotic environment. And that's always been true for me. Like, I love music. Like, music is such an important part of my life. And um it's just something that, like I can't imagine not incorporating it into, like it's all over my Instagram, it's all over my everything I write has music in it, in some way, because it's such an integral part of me. And I think it is very therapeutic, and it's very personal. And like, like a song can, like, just change your whole outlook on something. Like I could be having a terrible day and I can listen to like Stevie Wonder or something and like I'm like, okay, it's gonna be all right. It's like it can really change your mood, you know?
And when people study or when they're writing, sometimes they'll have their playlist. It could be classical, it could be Stevie Wonder, whatever. But what were the songs that you would put on to kind of get you into that writing?
When I was writing the book,
Yeah, like would you just listen to that song per chapter? I mean, because each chapter has a
I
song.
would. There were some, I think for the most part, like the music that's referenced in the beginning of every chapter is pretty much the genre I was listening to while reading each chapter. Like I would listen to like The Breeders, like on repeat. Like my Spotify playlist, like the top what's it called? The
Top
recap.
hits. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. My Spotify playlist at the end of that year was nuts. Like it was crazy because I was listening to Dolly Parton and Conway Twitty and and Fang and like it was just
Mhm.
like all over the place, but also there's like a cohesiveness in it because it represents like me as a person and like all the different parts of me. So yeah, like I listen to like I for sure the songs that are referenced in the beginning of the chapter, but also like that particular genre of music for whatever chapter it was like a big part of each chapter. It was actually hard to narrow down
Yeah.
which songs I kind of was like, okay, this is the most representative of this chapter or this time.
But that's something that I enjoyed about the book is that it sets the tone, each song, and it's almost like a movie, where there's that soundtrack. So I really respected the work that you did there.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that.
And before we start wrapping things up, um, you've spoken about your struggles with addiction, the traumas, also your journey as a writer. Um, What would you say, looking back at your life, for you, what is your truth that heals? What is your truth that sums it up for you?
I think um, just to be, I think that you have to be really true to your own voice. And like, I wish in hindsight that I would have listened to my inner voice more when I was younger. Like, I wish that I had started writing the way I write now, like more seriously. And I wish I would have been able to kind of like break through those vulnerable layers and really get to the meat of it when I was younger. But as my son said, like you weren't there yet. so so yeah, I think just being really true to like what is calling you inside, like whatever that thing is inside you that that spark that makes you feel alive and like propelled to do whatever it is, like honor that and run with it.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing. And again, to the audience, go check out See, Swallow Me. But now I wanted to inquire, will there be another book coming out?
I am working on another book. I'm in the notes app phase. but in the more serious aspect of the notes phase. But yeah, I'm working on a second book and writing articles and essays and that sort of thing. So
Awesome. And
yeah.
and if people want to find you, do you have like a social media or website that you would like to
So
share?
the website is just through the publisher that I'm with, and that's Empress Art, which is like not the easiest way to reach me. I can anybody can find me at Suki_Jones on Instagram. That's where I interact with people the very most.